It's time for my 7th read of 2021. Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, welcome. On this channel we post writing tips, unboxings, book reviews and the occasional vlog. Today I have the 7th book review of 2021 and it is Slade House by David Mitchell. If you've been on my channel recently this year, you'll know this is the second David Mitchell book I've read, and if you follow me on Instagram, we've kind of started to collect David Mitchell. It's mostly my partner who started me off on these, but now I've started to read his work, I kind of can't stop. Before we get into reviewing this book, I'll read you guys the blurb. There are kind of two blurbs in this book, so I'm going to read the one on the back first. Then I might read the other one in the spoiler section because it's sort of a choice if you want to read that before you read the book. So here is blurb number 1. On one side of a high wall lies a narrow, dank alley, on the other a sunlit garden, and between them a small black iron door. You just need to open it. Welcome to Slade House. This book has so many reviews. There's 2 good reviews on the back and then inside as well. Look at all those reviews. There's just so many, and I just love the artwork on the front. It's such a pretty book and it feels kind of soft. I don't know if that makes sense for a book, but it's so bendy. And it just feels really nice to hold and pick up. It's very light. It's a short read. It's 233 pages long. And inside are 5 short stories, all taking place in Slade House. So this is a horror book, really, and it sort of delves into the genre of sci-fi and the mythical world, life before death. And it's really, really well written. In similar style to the other David Mitchell book that I read, he has a very raw way of describing things and people, and his characterization comes across by how that character chooses to describe something and also what they describe and what they draw their attention to. Each short story follows a different character and they go through the eras as well. Each story is 9 years apart. So obviously the people's opinions, their dress code and things like that changed throughout the centuries, which I found really interesting to read, and I thought it shone a light on the 80s and times like that when I wasn't around, and really how far forward we've come, even though I know as a world we have to move forward so much further and we are still nowhere near perfect, but we're a lot better than it was back then. There's not that much I can say about this book without giving away some spoilers, because as I said, they're all short stories and they take place every 9 years. So if I tell you something about a starting one, it could lead you to the end ones. With that in mind, let's go straight to the spoiler section. Spoiler alert, spoiler alert. From this point, there might be some spoilers. So if you haven't read this book and you want to read it without knowing anything about it first, skip to this time here for my overall review and my marks out of 10. If you do want to hear more about this book or you have read it and want to hear my opinions, then stay tuned for the second part. First of all, let's read that second blurb from this book because, as I said, I think it's a choice to read this one inside before or after you've read the story. So let's go for blurb number 2. Turn down Slade Alley, narrow, dank and easy to miss even when you're looking for it. Find the small black iron door set into the right-hand wall. No handle, no keyhole, but at your touch it swings open. Enter the sunlit garden of an old house that doesn't quite make sense. Too grand for the shabby neighbourhood, too large for the space it occupies. A stranger greets you and invites you inside. At first you won't want to leave. Later you'll find that you can't. This unnerving, taut and intricately woven tale by one of our most original and bewitching writers begins in 1979 and comes to its turbulent conclusion around Halloween 2015. Because every 9 years, on the last Saturday of October, a guest is summoned to Slade House. But why has that person been chosen? By whom and for what purpose? The answers lie waiting in the long attic at the top of the stairs. Now, if you've read it, you'll see why I've saved that for the spoiler section of this review, because it kind of tells you already about the attic. It tells you that someone is summoned, and basically you're then going to read this book trying to work out why they're summoned. So that's why it's in the second part. The first short story is called The Right Sort, and you'll see in the book it shows a picture of a door in a very high wall. So it's sort of the iron door to Slade House. And the date of this first one is 1979. So I kind of like how the title is The Right Sort, because as it's in 1979, It portrays a single mother with her young son who possibly has some learning difficulties, and she's trying to get in with the right sort of people who can further her career and give them a better life. They have to pretend, that they arrived by taxi, that they're wearing their Sunday best, and give off the air that they have more money than they actually have. I loved how in this first short story, the villain makes everything seem like a hallucination, as if it's drug-induced, and you don't actually know what or how they're causing this little boy to have all of these visions. It's also really refreshing to read from a character's point of view who possibly has learning difficulties and has heightened senses compared to most other people. Things that we might let just pass by, he picks up on, and it obviously causes him a lot of distress, and it's really interesting to read from that point of view and to try to understand how the world really does change depending on how you're wired and what that can consequently cause you. So it causes him a lot of distress, and it's horrible to see, but also really interesting and a good thing to learn about as well. On page 35, I have a quote which says, "Tenderized soul to pay the power bills for the next 9 years." This foreshadows, if you haven't read the second blurb, that something like this will happen again in 9 years' time, and that they're doing it to pay the power bills, which again foreshadows what are they powering up, what's going on. It's really good and leads to so many questions at this stage. Story number 2, Shining Armour. Now this one is based in 1988, and the picture is a clock, so like time ticking away, which really goes well at foreshadowing how in this one the character really loses his sense of time. In the first one, the little boy doesn't really know how much time's passed. It really feels like a summer afternoon. Whereas in this one, really no idea. At one point he questions how many Saturdays had he been at the house, how many evening meals had he eaten. He only describes one, and yet he remembers 4 or 5. In just the first page of this character story, I want him to be devoured by the Soul Eaters. He is such an arrogant, racist and sexist guy. But again, this is what I like about David Mitchell's writing. He doesn't sugarcoat anyone. There are people, and definitely were people in the 80s, who were like this. To show that as a character, he has made an unlikable character. On page 40 and 41, I also find it so funny and so hypocritical that this guy is so racist, and yet he can't wait to get home for his tandoori chicken. What is it with racists? They hate people, and yet they'll still eat the cuisine. On page 58, there's a quote which says, "A cooker big enough to roast a small child," which I thought was an excellent reference to the first story, as also their first victim was the small boy. It sort of puts into question that, oh my god, they did eat him, and it's a sort of metaphor for how these soul eaters ate that poor child. It's also refreshing how different this character and how they entice him in is from the first boy. He's lured into the house because of fear, whereas this man is lured in through sexual desire and the need to want to feel empowered. He wants to be powerful, he wants to be obeyed, and he wants to ultimately be worshipped by this woman, and for her to give him anything that he wants, which he gets at the price of his soul. The third short story in this book is called Oink Oink. Third short story, Oink Oink, is set in 1997, and the picture for this is a person's reflection of their eye in a compact mirror. Like all the others, links in to the main character of this short story. She is constantly comparing her physical image to those around her, and I really liked Mitchell's way of how she describes other people. She describes them as a comparison of how much better they are, in her opinion, than to herself. So again, we're sort of delving into mental health now. In the first book, we went into disabilities and learning difficulties. The second, we've gone into a racist, toxic masculine mind. And in this one, we're going into a young student's mind in a world where her appearance is one of the most important things to her and something that she feels judged on at all times. So we're going into mental health and depression and possible social anxiety. She's always scared of what people are thinking or saying about her and how she comes across, which ultimately sort of links into how she also eats her feelings. Her eating habits are a coping mechanism to how she feels and just how upset she is by everything going on around her. By this third short story, I started to question how the twins are luring them in. So now that we know every 9 years the twins are coming, they're luring someone in and they're going to eat their soul. By this point, you now know the twins are there. So we're aware that the girl played the woman that lured in the second character, and we know the boy played the young child that played with the boy. So in this one, the entire time when she enters the house, you're trying to spot the twins. You're trying to work out who are they, which one's luring them in, and what are they going to do to this poor girl. Like in the second story, they're giving the character what she wants. So she's getting attention from the boy that she fancies. And it also gives you false hope. So this boy, who's actually being played by one of the twins, is luring her into a trap which looks like an escape. But at the same time, in the story, you get a good glimpse of the twins starting to fail. So in the first, the little boy knew nothing. There was no giveaway. It was like a strange drug-induced hallucination. By the second, the man sees the young boy's portrait and then sees his own portrait with no eyes. And he then starts to realize he's in trouble. Once he gets into the attic and meets the woman, he realizes something is up and he needs to escape. He wants to take her with her. The inner cop comes out and he wants to release this woman, which obviously doesn't work out. By the third, the twins' world is starting to crumble, and the main character meets the man from the original, and he gives her a weapon, which sadly she doesn't get to use. Because by the time she gets the weapon and understands that there is no escape and that the twins have lured her into this trap, it's all over and we lose her. The third character describes this man as a ghost, as if a ghost has come back, and it's just the remnants of his soul, which is sort of how we describe a ghost anyway. But now their world is starting to unravel, so now we're not just looking for where the twins are, we're looking for the cracks that are starting to show. I also got tricked by David Mitchell in this one. When the news report was showing the missing student, I really thought that was a crack at first, until the twins discuss it and say how it's a stroke of genius that they brought that real world in. And I was like, no. I don't normally get tricked when I read, guys, but I got tricked in this one. The fourth short story in this is called You Dark Horse You. So this is 2006 now, and it is You Dark Horse, and we see that the picture in this is the cat hairpin, which is the weapon which was handed over in the previous story. That picture foreshadows that that will play a major role in this year's trap. 2006 really got me in the feels because it is the third character's elder sister, and she's come to try to find her and to save her, and it's like, oh, you are really rooting for her. Now, this was actually a book club book for me, so I discussed this with them. We did have different opinions on this chapter in particular. I really liked it. I am a nosy person apparently, and I like to hear the backstories, and I just found the twins' backstory so interesting. But also I do agree it is kind of an information dump of the twins' past, and it explains everything that's going on and everything that they are doing, which Mitchell might have been able to do in a better way, but at the same time these are 5 short stories, so I struggle to see how he could get that much information in a short story following this pattern without the book becoming bigger and bigger. So to keep it short, this feels like the most sensible way to do it. And for me, it didn't feel like an info dump because I was really interested in it. And it's also fun how the twins argue at the end about doing that info dump, and they argue that he told her too much, which obviously foreshadows the last story in this collection. I did like in this story on page 153 how his elixir contained cocaine. I love how many old medicines actually contained now illegal drugs, and I just find it so funny how he stuck to that tradition and stuck to historical accuracies at the same time as being very sci-fi and out of this world with this idea of soul hopping and eating someone's soul. On page 172, I also enjoy how Mitchell groups politicians in with warlords, because I have quite strong political opinions and it's refreshing to find someone who has similar ones to me as well in a book. I believe it's around page 174 where you realise that this character is trapped and that's it. She's not getting it out. She is in the twins' grasp, and yet she stabs Jonas, the male twin, with the hairpin, and it leaves you hanging on if he survives or not. Does that mean he's dead? Will there be we know there's going to be another one because there's another short story, but will there just be one twin? Has he died now? Is that the end of it? Has she reaped some sort of revenge on them killing her sister? And also, does she survive? It never fully tells you if she escapes or not, but we know if they have eaten her soul that it was difficult to do, which really grasps you to read the fifth and final short story in this book. The final short, this one, is called Astronauts. This one is in 2015 and it shows the candle. So this is the candle which is so prominent in all of the previous stories. It is this ever lit candle which keeps the twins' world together. And I love how by this point we know what they're doing. We understood all the previous foreshadowing. We know the power bills are them keeping this still world around them alive and stopping their world coming crumbling down and stopping their bodies from dying. We know that they have to do it every 9 years or it runs out of steam. And we also have a good foreshadow because we know the twins are not the only people out there with these abilities. There are other people who can eat souls and can live forever, and it raises so many questions in this final chapter of, are the twins going to win, and is the story going to have an ending where they just continue, or is it going to close and complete the story? I was actually worried before I read the final story that it wasn't going to close. I really thought it was going to be yet another killing and that's it, the end. The twins are just going to continue on and nothing is going to change. Again, we had different opinions in the book club about the very end. I was happy with the end, as was someone else. Another person really wanted them to just focus on the changing eras and wanted David Mitchell to really focus in on that. Others wanted it to be the ending of obliteration, so the characters were all gone. I liked it. I found it quite satisfying and I thought it linked in well to the Mitchell world and makes you want to read further and maybe read Bone Clocks next, which as far as I can see kind of maybe uses some of these characters again. As for the fifth story itself, I really like how it's now written from Nora's point of view, which is the female twin. It's no longer the victim who we're seeing through, it is the villainess herself. We also find out that Jonas is just trapped in time with his wound and that he cannot die as long as Nora tempts a soul in. And we also know that they didn't get to have the fourth soul. She was not consumed by them, so they are running on fumes, and if they do not get a soul this time round, then their world will collapse and that is the end of them. Page 219, I have a quote that I loved. Why in the 11,011 names of God would I oblige two parasitic soul slayers by imbibing their poison? Yes, I love this. It tells us that obviously they must consume food or some kind of sustenance in order for the twins to disconnect the soul. And I love how the victim in this acts like a normal victim until this point, and it's like, yes, thank God. I was so worried that this wouldn't happen, that she'd just be consumed and that would be the end of it, but it's not. She has got the twins and I love that. Jazz over at Red Panda Reads, who is the creator of the book club that I am in, she was a junior doctor and she also really loved the fact that the character found out it was a hallucination by the Evian water bottle, because obviously the NHS would not give you an Evian water bottle. You just get some tap water in a plastic cup. They would never give you Evian, and I love how that is the telltale sign of the moment that they completely screwed up. On page 229 there is another quote which leads you into wanting to read the Bone Clocks. Sentenced, you say, as if you'd willingly swap your metal life for a bone clock. This refers to something that Mitchell is really interested in. He refers to our bodies as a bone clock because the time is always ticking towards your death. And our clock is just made of bone and flesh and skin, and eventually when that clock stops is when you die. And it's something that he explores in a lot of his books. As I said earlier, this ending was a controversial topic in the book club. I loved how the story ended on a cliffhanger, but one that would take you to another book, but felt satisfying, like complete. The twins were no longer doing the 9 years of getting the souls to run their machine. However, other people in the group would have preferred that. Other people wanted it to just focus on the time changes. So it depends on what you really wanted. For me personally, I really liked the ending. Overall, I really liked this book. It was a really fast and easy read. It's just 5 short stories at 233 pages. It's a horror and it has sci-fi / otherworldly bits in it. So I find it really interesting and it grips you because you want to know if the twins are going to get another soul. You want to know how they're going to do it, how this poor character is lured in, if they will escape, if they will survive, if the twins will be destroyed at the end. So I would give this book 9 out of 10 stars. The only reason it doesn't receive 10 stars from me is because I know it's going to happen every 9 years. And I know the story has 5 shorts in it, so the main reason to keep reading is me thinking, please do not disappoint me, Mitchell. Please don't just leave me hanging at the end of this book. But at the same time, I could easily put this book down and come back to it later. I sort of knew what was going to happen to the characters ultimately. It was just a case of 50-50, will they survive or not? So it wasn't as gripping as it could have been, which is why it's a 9 out of 10 rather than 10 out of 10. And that's it for my 7th read of 2021. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you like what you see, don't forget to give this video a thumbs up. Hit that subscribe button if you want to see as soon as I upload. Click that little bell down below. You can also follow me on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram or Tumblr. I post your bookish pictures as well as my writing tips and unboxings on there. And thanks for watching, guys. Bye!